When I was preparing for this episode, I went back to the first couple podcast episodes that I did, and one of the big ones that I did was why Clemson would win 10 games this season. And when I did that video, that was when everybody was shitting on Clemson for not using the transfer portal at all. So for Clemson to kind of, I guess, be lucky to even be in the ACC championship game playing SMU, it is kind of fitting in that way. But also, too, you have to ask yourself, too, at least to me, that's the most unpredictable game out of all the the Power Four conference championship games. Because at least for the other three, you can kind of argue that there's a legitimate favorite. Whereas with this game, although Clemson is being favored by the majority of kind of the mainstream media, there aren't really a lot of weaknesses in terms of this SMU team. I've talked about SMU a number of times on this program, particularly when I covered them playing Pittsburgh. And needless to say, I was completely inaccurate assessment of that game because SMU totally ended up whooping Pitt's ass in that game. But the couple things that SMU have going for them: one, their offense has been pretty much unstoppable this season, averaging over 30 plus points a game. Kevin Jennings has been a dog, not turning over the ball too much, being athletic enough to be what I would consider a dual threat quarterback. And also, they've been undefeated in conference play this year. Only one of two teams who have done this season, other than Oregon. So it's a testament to what SMU has done so far, and it obviously earned Rhett Lashley a huge extension too. So for them to be able to come into the ACC year one, not really have no expectations whatsoever in terms of kind of being in the mix here, and for them to be able to turn this around this quickly too, because even the beginning of the season, watching them play BYU, and that offense was looking completely just anemic in general. So for them to go from that type of play to averaging almost 40 points a game, which is fifth in the country, is just pretty incredible to watch too, which makes me a little bit nervous to say that Clemson should still be favored in this game, because obviously they lost to South Carolina last weekend, and that was a phenomenal game to watch, by the way, for those who didn't watch. But the big question for Clemson, for really everybody this year, was Kate Klubnik able to show up and be more consistent and not turn the ball over? And man, has he done that this season? I mean, even when you look at Clemson as a whole, they are pretty much the pillar of success and consistency in college football. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge Dabo Sweeney guy. I'll always defend him, especially his transfer portal use. I think a lot of people tend to overlook what he really does in terms of being able to develop his players, be able to sell the vision that of what he's doing too. And if they do actually end up winning 10 games this year and making it and winning the ACC championship and being a top four seed in the playoffs, I think he's sticking it to every single person who's building through the portal of hey, we're going to do it our way. And you can possibly see other teams adapt that too. Because when you look at other teams who don't use the port, who didn't use any transfers this year, you think of the Penn States, you think of Iowa, and some other Big Ten programs who never really used that. But Dabo's success speaks for itself. Two national championships, made the college football playoff 6 times, won the ACC 8 times since starting as head coach in 2010. So all of that, is important when it comes to a game like this. He's been there and done that. Where Rhett Lashley is, the young guy who is writing this story for himself too in this SMU Mustangs team. And when you look at this on paper, what points out to me is I think this game really could be a shootout, because when you look at SMU and you look at Clemson, the commonality that they both have together is they both know how to put up points. Even when you watch Clemson at the beginning of the season, I go back and remember them playing Appalachian State, for example, and putting up 50 plus points on them. Or if you want to go, or just my earlier example, talking about SMU going up against Pittsburgh, or SMU going up against UCal. Whoever SMU's been putting up against, they've been putting up points, putting up success. And especially too, when you think about this SMU team in terms of what type of NIL money is going to be coming to the picture, the fact that they said, hey, we don't even need any ACC money for the first 8 years of the deal. It's a testament to where they're trying to get to, especially compared to the 1980s SMU. And also, they're really seizing this moment right now, because all things considered, when you look at this game, it would, for all intents and purposes, it would be a lot cleaner if SMU just won this game, right? Because now you open up the floodgates of, okay, if Clemson were to win this game, being a 10-3 team, where does that leave SMU? Should SMU still be in the college football playoff? Where does that lead SMU compared to Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina? And it also opens up a number of questions in terms of the college football committee's current criticism right now, because the main criticism that's being debated between Miami versus Alabama is, are you looking at who's been playing better this season, or are you looking at it in terms of whether or not Miami has deserved it over Alabama? Because when you look at it full picture, yes, Alabama's lost 3 games this season, but I would make the argument that 2024 Alabama deserves to be in more than 2023 Alabama. So if you put them in for the second straight year, man, it can definitely add some complications to this. But in terms of this game overall, if Clemson pretty much needs to do what they've done all season. Cade Klubnik has been great at not turning the ball over. I'd say his pocket presence has been brilliant this year in terms of being able to diagnose defenses, figuring out when he needs to get out of the pocket, trusting his receivers, trusting his offensive line. Having Phil Mofa back has been a big deal for him, especially when he dealt with those ankle injuries earlier into the season. So for them to kind of put this all together at the perfect time, because even when you look back at the Georgia game in the beginning of the season, a lot of people were kind of saying to themselves, hey, this just kind of writing off Clemson in that way. But for them to be able to come back and be in this moment, you got to imagine too that I think Clemson's really going to be motivated to win this game, especially coming off a heartbreaking loss versus South Carolina, which was a phenomenal game to watch, and for Cade Klubnik to kind of blossom in terms of being his second full season starting with over 3,000 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, 4th most in the FBS. You got to give Dabo and this offensive staff and Garrett Riley a ton of credit for being able to say, hey, we're going to stick with our guy, even though that he's been struggling throughout the season, but throughout last season, I mean. But in terms of SMU, a lot of people don't really talk about them in terms of their defense, but they rank 19th in terms of scoring defense this season. So it makes you think to yourself, man, if SMU can be able to get a couple turnovers, for example, and they're able to, play a pretty clean game too, because, for example, even when you look at they've had a lot of highs and lows. You can go back and talk about the Pittsburgh game where they completely dominated, or you can go back and look at that Duke game where they managed to just squeak by in overtime. However, they had 5+ turnovers in that game. So I guess you can say that outside of that game, SMU has also been pretty damn consistent too. But at the same time, to me, what's really going to set apart Clemson from SMU is the fact that, the overall pedigree that Dabo Swinney has, and being in these sort of moments already too. It definitely gives a big one up to Clemson right now. And also their defense is pretty solid, especially when you look at this front seven, and even the safeties. They've done a phenomenal job this year. They really don't give up too many explosive plays, and Clemson's just really firing on all cylinders right now. And in terms of when you go back and look at SMU again, you got Kevin Jennings, who is a solid quarterback dual threat, and also you got Bernard Smith, who I think could do some stuff this weekend, in terms of, he for the most part doesn't get a lot of attention, but he has over 1,000 rushing yards this season, 8 touchdowns, and he's quick, he's shifty, and he is the type of guy that when it's 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 3, you can rush him down the middle and trust him to get those yards. Because to me, when you ask myself how this game's going to turn out, one, I do think this is going to be a lot more high scoring than people think. I'm thinking over under at least 55, 60 points. But in terms of both these programs, they've both been so consistent offensively. To me, it's the defense that's really going to kind of speak in terms of who ends up winning this game too. Because overall, both quarterbacks are really coming out swinging. Dabo's going to be bringing some pressure, especially that defensive line. If they can get home and be able to make SMU one-dimensional, I wouldn't be surprised if Clemson ultimately ends up winning this game. However, for SMU to counter this, I think you have to have, really winning on those third downs. You can't be one-dimensional against a team like Clemson. You can talk about how Clemson has lost 3 games this year, and yes, they've lost to some really good teams. However, what makes Clemson a special team is consistency and the success that they've had, but also too, you just can't underestimate them when he's gone 8-1 in ACC championship games. But regardless, even if you're SMU, this game really does feel like a game where whoever wins is in and whoever loses is probably done. But in terms of this game, at least in my opinion, the most unpredictable one,